Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. I'm your host, Jim Chapman, and we're back with a double episode of Bad Teachers. And today, this episode's going to be a little bit different. And you'll figure out why as we get into it. But I'm going to take you to Lufkin, Texas, and I'll tell you about a now former special needs kindergarten teacher by the name of Heather Robertson. And we're going to go to April 22nd of 2017, and a Lufkin police officer arrests this teacher on warrants of having an inappropriate relationship between an educator and a student. Heather Robertson was actually pulled over in her vehicle, and that warrant was served right there on the street. So she goes to jail. Now, according to the arrest warrant, police received information that Robertson had possibly been sexually involved with several high school students. And after obtaining a list of students who were possibly sexually involved with Robertson, police began to question those students. Now, one of the students told police that he and Robertson began chatting and sexting, quote, on Snapchat shortly after spring break. At some point, Robertson reportedly asked him to come over to her apartment to have sex. The boy then told Robertson that a friend was with him, and he asked if it was okay if his friend went with him to her house. And she said, "Oh, that's fine." The boys then said when they arrived at the apartment, Robertson was lying on the couch vaping. So after speaking with the boys for a few minutes, Robertson told them to follow her into her bedroom, where she began to take off her clothes before having sex with both students at the same time. The boys then told police that there were two other students who possibly had been sexually involved with Robertson. So police then spoke with those two other students, and they corroborated everything the original students had said. They also said they had sex with her at her apartment on multiple occasions. One of the boys told police he would sneak out of his house and Robertson would pick him up and take him to her apartment. He said he and Robertson, quote, somehow became friends on Snapchat, and that at some point she sent him a message asking if he and another student would like to hang out. He said Robertson picked him up and his friend. It was late at night. She took them over to her apartment and she had sex with them. He also told police he had sex with Robertson on 2 or 3 other occasions. The boy's friend told police he had sex with Robertson twice, but he could not remember the exact dates. So 4 students in total came forward. And it's important to mention she was an elementary school teacher, but the students didn't go to school where she taught. They were high school students. It doesn't make it much better, but I didn't want anyone to assume these were kindergartners. And it's especially important to note that in Texas, they have a law where if you're a teacher, you can't just randomly have sex with students, even if they're not your own students, even if they're 18. If they're in high school and they're students, there's laws against that in Texas. And I don't know if I told her age yet, but Heather Robertson at this point is 38 years old. So once police get all this information about her, they interview Robertson after they served that warrant and arrested her in her car. And she admitted to picking the boys up. She admitted to taking them to her apartment where they had sex. And she admitted that one particular student she had sex with on 4 occasions. She said the first sexual encounter occurred in late 2016. Now, keep in mind, this is 2017 when she was arrested. So she says that particular student she had sex with just a few weeks before she was arrested. She also admitting to have sex with 2 students at the same time. So obviously the original 2 boys that reported this were telling the truth, but she said it was only one time that she was sexually involved with both boys at the same time, as if that makes it any better. She went on to tell the police she did not require the boys to use a condom because, quote, she was no longer able to have children. She also stated she recently became a heavy drinker and would sometimes forget the details of the sexual encounters. She also said she had instructed the boys not to tell anyone because she would, quote, get in trouble. So obviously 2017 is a bad freaking year for Robertson, but it was bad before this arrest took place. In March of 2017, which was a month prior to her arrest for this sexual contact with students, she was arrested for DWI. Not a good year for her. Now, the school superintendent, Mary Ann Whitaker, said, quote, we acted immediately and began our investigation. We pursued the correct protocol we have to follow, and we accepted the resignation of the teacher. And y'all, Robertson wasn't a brand new teacher. As a matter of fact, she had been a teacher for 17 years prior to this arrest, and she was looking at up to 20 years in prison for messing with these four boys, should she be found guilty. So a couple of weeks after her arrest on May 4th of 2017, it just gets worse for Heather Robertson. 2 additional charges of improper relationships between an educator and a student were filed. So that brought her charges at this point up to 6 sexual assaults in total. So in an affidavit with those additional charges listed, a boy came forward and said he had sex with Robertson in her apartment the day before Thanksgiving. And he said afterwards, Robertson drove him home. And the second affidavit also alleged that Robertson had sex with another boy on numerous occasions in her vehicle and at her apartment. Now, it's important to note when these and the other charges came out, Heather Robertson was still in jail. Her bail, which was originally set at $600,000, she apparently could not pay. So on May 17th, she applies for a bail reduction through her attorney. And her attorney argued that the current bail amount was, in his mind, excessive and beyond the financial means of Heather Robertson. And he stated that the bail amount violated Robertson's 8th and 14th Amendment rights for fair due process against cruel and unusual punishment. And I want to note here that Heather Robertson was arrested, but she wasn't indicted yet by a grand jury. And let me explain how that works. Sometimes prosecutors, they're not sure if they have enough evidence on a case. So they will convene a grand jury before they even arrest somebody, and they'll present evidence. And these grand juries, they convene in secret, and they'll either give what's known as a true bill indictment or a no bill. A true bill indictment means there's enough evidence to proceed forward and that grand jury found reasonable cause to find a person guilty. If it's a no bill, it's like a not guilty jury finding. You can still arrest them. You can still take them to court, etc., but it's a good indication on if they'll be found guilty in a court of law. Now, in this case, I guess they felt confident with their evidence. So they didn't seek out the services of a grand jury prior to arresting her, but they did convene a grand jury, and that grand jury returned 21 indictments against Heather Robertson. This was on June 29th of 2017. And I'm not going to go through all 21 of these charges. They're all related to sex with these high school kids. And I got to say one thing about Lufkin, Texas, and that's that the wheels of justice turn pretty damn fast there. On September 28th of 2017, as all these teachers pretty much do that screw these students that I've covered in the past when there's a ton of evidence against them, she cops a deal. And she pleaded guilty to these charges. Now, as part of that agreement, the, at this point, 39-year-old Heather Lee Robertson, she would have to surrender, obviously, her teaching certification. She would have to register as a sex offender for the rest of her life. And she ended up with 10 years in state prison, which is no cakewalk, right? But she was facing 240 years in prison if she would have been convicted on all the counts. And the district attorney was quoted as saying, "Teachers are trusted with our most valuable and most precious asset every day. And when they destroy that trust, they will be held accountable for their betrayal. they will face significant punishment. And I got to say, they moved swiftly on this one, and that is significant, a punishment, compared to what we normally hear. So she goes to prison for that. And remember, I told you she had already been arrested for DWI just the month prior to her arrest for these sex crimes? Well, on October 13th of 2017, she showed up for court on that DWI charge, and she pleaded guilty to driving while intoxicated. And that tacked a little bit of time onto her sentence, but essentially, Heather Robertson, she's going to spend 10 years in jail. A pretty wild story, and I wanted to include it today because this is someone who actually got some significant time. So shout out to Lufkin, Texas. And I'm going to bring you another one today. I'm going to actually take you to Daytona Beach, Florida. And y'all know Daytona Beach. It's known for a lot of things. Used to be a huge destination back in my day, and it has beautiful beaches, really big tourist spot. But in 2018, it became famous for another reason, and that is a bad teacher by the name of Stephanie Peterson. And that's who I'm going to tell you about today. And I can't tell this story without describing Stephanie because her looks play a huge key in the sentence that she received, in my opinion. And I'll get into that. But beautiful girl, straight, long, dark hair, very in shape. And at the time of her arrest, this case went absolutely viral all over the social media, all over the internet because of how beautiful Stephanie Peterson is. Now, at the time she got arrested, she was 26 years old. So we're going to go to February 28th of 2018. And detectives get a call and they respond to the home of a 14-year-old student. When detectives get there, his mother, she has quite the story to tell these detectives. And it's a little bit different than how some of these bad teachers get caught in the act. In this case, the student's mother, she's looking for a tutor. A teacher reached out and said, "Hey, I can be a tutor for your son." And of course, while she's doing this, the son happens to be in the room and she's on the phone with the teacher. And she jokingly said, according to the mother, that she told the lady, "As long as I don't have to worry about you molesting him." Now, that might seem like a weird comment to make, but in Florida during this time frame, there were a lot of teachers getting caught with students, and it was all over the news in the state of Florida. This woman was, what she thought, making a joke about this. As soon as she says that, her son pipes up and says, "Anybody can molest you." And when she gets off the phone, she inquires about what he meant by that comment. And according to his mother, her son started crying and confesses to sex with his teacher, Stephanie Peterson, who, as I said, was 26 years old and he's 14. So detectives speak with this student, and according to the student, and incidentally, when this was all occurring, he was in 8th grade. He tells detectives that Peterson would send him nude photos on Snapchat. He said this went on for a little while, and then she started coming to his home late at night, around 11 p.m. on several occasions, and then she'd bring him back after having sex with him at around 1 or 2 a.m. So this kid was sneaking out of his house, and this teacher was facilitating it. Now, could you imagine finding out your son is not in his room late at night? Maybe you just go in there to check on him. He's not there. You're freaking out. You call police. My son's missing. And the whole time he's with this 26-year-old teacher having sex. What a nightmare. Now, his mother never actually caught him doing that, sneaking out. But think of how easily that could have happened and the fear that would have created for that family with their son's just gone from his room. The victim went on to tell police that in addition to all of that, she also bought him marijuana and bowls for smoking that marijuana. And totally consistent with just about every case I cover, Peterson told him that he could not tell anyone about their relationship or they would both get in trouble. And that's important Because number one, it takes away the entire defense that a person might try to use saying, I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. And number two, it's a huge grooming technique that is used by almost anyone who takes advantage of children. They try to act like the child's going to be in trouble along with them, and that's how they keep them quiet. So if you have kids, have that conversation and tell them, if anybody ever touches you inappropriately, you're not going to get in trouble. Because believe it or not, a lot of children buy that whole deal, hook, line, and sinker. So police hear this story, and then they go to Peterson. They take her into custody. They interview her. After the interview, she is booked into jail with a $25,000 bond. And that's where she sat until her bail hearing. And something really crazy happens at this bail hearing. And it never ceases to amaze me as to why this problem even exists, honestly. And that is, at her bail, her attorney, he wants to get her bail reduced, which that's what they do. I get that. You're defending a client, and that's in your client's best interest. But in almost all cases, it seems like judges side with the accused rather than the victims. And minutes later, the judge reduces her bail in half from $25,000 to $12,500. After this science teacher is accused of having sex with this 14-year-old multiple times, and this 14-year-old was in middle school. And it leaves no doubt as to why these teacher-student relationships are such a fucking problem these days. And it was at that bail hearing that her attorney argued that she posed no danger to society, she was not a flight risk, and that she, basically, boom. And basically, that's why she should have this bail reduction, etc. And while all that may be true, I mean, there should be some sort of ramification for molesting kids, don't you think? Now, in one of the articles that I read while researching this case, I want to just quote one paragraph to you that I found interesting. It said, during the first appearance that she had in court, she was dressed in an orange jumpsuit. She looked pale, and her appearance, aside from her long, dark blue painted fingernails, were significantly different from the photographs of her that were widely viewed once news stories of her arrest were posted on the web. Those viral images were taken from her Facebook page, which was removed from public view shortly after. And why I bring that up is it indicates that she was embarrassed and shamed for all of this. And I say good for her. I'm glad she felt ashamed. She should have felt ashamed. But I'll share some of those pictures with the Patreon celebrity members on Patreon. So look for those. And some more information came out at that bail hearing. Sheriff's deputies mentioned that some of the encounters that they had took place at her house while her husband was at work. Her husband was a firefighter. Some of the sex took place in a barn behind his parents' home, and some of the sex took place in the teen's parents' driveway. Could you imagine? You're looking for your son, you open the front door, and he's in a car having sex with his teacher? Crazy. And it should come as no surprise that her husband filed for divorce right after she gets bond for all this. Detectives also said they obtained provocative photos of Peterson, which had been sent to the teen. And her attorney argued that her admission, her statements that she admitted to police when they interviewed her, that those statements were obtained illegally, which I can only surmise that he's accusing police of not reading her Miranda rights, which is likely bullshit. But all that being said, she did get bail in the amount of $12,500. You only put up 10% of that. So she put up like $1,200. She gets out of jail for having sex with this kid. Ridiculous. And the sheriff was quoted as saying, I think it's a good place for her, meaning jail. You play them with drugs and you're in a position of power and you tell them, don't tell anybody because we're going to get in trouble. I'm going to make you the teacher's aide and all of these sort of things she was telling this kid. Basically, the childhood was stolen from this young man. And it was on April 12th of 2018 that she actually gets formally charged. And in those formal charges, they included 2 counts of lewd and lascivious battery sex with a victim 12 or older, but less than 16. And each of those are a second-degree felony, punishable by up to 15 years in prison. And she was also charged with transmission of material harmful to minors by electronic device. That's a third-degree felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Now, count 1 accused Peterson of unlawfully having sexual intercourse with the teenager between November 1st of 2017 and January 31st of 2018. So this went on for quite a little while. Count 2 accused Peterson of performing oral sex on the teenager between November 1st of 2017 and January 31st of 2018, and count 3 accused Peterson of transmitting harmful information or images to the minor between November 1st of 2017 and January 31st of 2018. Peterson was also accused of sending the 14-year-old boy nude photos of herself. So by October 13th of 2018, more details came out, and it was discovered the 14-year-old student had actually told police the teacher had contacted him on Snapchat and told him to delete everything, and wrote she didn't know where her brain was. She added it was the worst decision of her life. Now, among the records provided on those Snapchat messages, they show Peterson panicking when she learned the 14-year-old's mother was going to call police. The messages she wrote include, quote, "So she's planning on doing something with it," unquote. She continued on saying, "I hate you so much. Please tell her it was the worst decision of my life and I know it was bad. I don't know where my brain was, but somehow I fell in love with you briefly and I don't know why, and I'll never be the same person because of it." Then, get this. She continues messaging the student, and she says, "Should I call her?" Meaning the student's mother, which I can only imagine how that fucking conversation would have went. At least I know how it would have went in my household. And the final message she sent was, "Please delete everything." So in these messages, this 26-year-old teacher is saying she's in love with a 14-year-old. WTF. Now, information also came out that investigators talked to 2 other students about whether Peterson had any inappropriate relationships with them. One of those students said nothing inappropriate ever happened. The other student, which was a 13-year-old, said there was no physical contact, but the teacher had sent him naked pictures on Snapchat. So police confiscated his phone, but they could not find any naked pictures. So there just wasn't any evidence there to charge her with anything. However, they did find some weird messages that were exchanged back and forth between Peterson and that 13-year-old. There was no direct talk of sex in those messages, but there was some strange things that were discussed. I'll read them to you. Peterson said to the 13-year-old, quote, "I should not have said any of that last night. I'm sorry." And the 13-year-old responded with, "It's fine, Miss P," and continued with, "Why are you sorry?" Laugh out loud. Peterson responded with, "Because I shouldn't have said anything." And a few texts later, that 13-year-old said, "I won't tell anyone," but he doesn't specify what he won't tell anyone. He just said, "I have it and I'm not going to tell anybody." So Peterson responds to that with, quote, "I'm not upset. I just don't want to hurt you or do anything to get us in trouble." So it's easy to opine that there may have been some talking about inappropriate things, but there's just not enough evidence, and the student wasn't admitting to it. And it's also interesting to point out that it was at this time that the public found out that Stephanie Peterson's father was actually an attorney in the area. And I'm sure that helped. And there were a lot more details on contact she had with that 14-year-old that came out. Apparently, Stephanie Peterson had sent him a picture of a woman's vagina on Snapchat, as well as a picture of her naked taking a shower, with her face completely visible in the photo, so she couldn't deny it. It was also discovered that the teen told investigators the situation started after Peterson let him use her smartphone so he could log into her Instagram account to check his messages, but he forgot to log out of it. And later that night, she gets home, opens up her phone. She sees the Instagram is actually his Instagram, and she sends him a message through his own Instagram account. And that's how they started communicating. From there, they went to Snapchat, and that's where the photos started. Through that, they decided to meet up, and she drove to his house one night. He sneaked out to her car, and they had sex right there in his driveway in her car. The student also said she gave him oral sex on her couch in her house and twice in the barn behind his house. Peterson had also asked him to have sexual intercourse with her 2 other times, but he said he turned that down because he didn't have condoms. And sadly, it was also discovered that the teen admitted to Peterson taking his virginity. So for all these charges and all this evidence that police had gathered, what do you think happened? Well, you've listened to Bad Teachers enough to figure out this one. On October 17th of 2018, she cut a deal and she pleaded guilty to having sex with that 14-year-old student. And she pleaded guilty to sending him those photos. And as part of that deal, prosecutors dropped that second count of sexual battery. So she awaited her sentencing. That sentencing did occur. This was on December 19th of 2018, and she was sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 2 years of community control, which is basically house arrest, same thing. And she must register as a sex offender for the rest of her life. And it was at this sentencing that Peterson took the stand and she read a statement. And her statement said, quote, "I wish I could make it clear how sorry I am for what occurred. If I could say one thing to the victim, it would be that I'm sorry. 2 words that are used too often without much meaning, but I can honestly say with everything in my heart that I mean it to its truest definition. It's a huge misfortune what has happened, and I hope I'll be able to make things right by staying on medication and attending regular therapy." And she went on to say she knew her actions were unforgivable. Teaching was the most meaningful thing in my life, and it's all I ever wanted to do growing up. And knowing that I was in a position of power and misusing that power to negatively influence another person's life is a morbid thought. I have to think about it all day, every day. And it's that last part that gets me. She ended that statement with, "I have to think about it all day, every day." Not the victim has to think about it every day. It's all about her. Now, the victim's mother, she was not happy at all about this 3-year sentence. She actually took the stand at the sentencing and called for Peterson to be sent to prison for the maximum that she could get for cutting a deal. She said her previously funny, lighthearted son has grown to reserved and angry. She said he's now in high school where some students tease him about having sex with his teacher. And she said Peterson should not get any breaks because she was a woman and she's beautiful. The sexual abuse inflicted on him by someone he trusted and liked so much has left him hardened, his mother said. He is now untrustworthy of new people and even old friends. A psychologist testified earlier in the sentencing hearing that Peterson was in the midst of a manic attack when she had sex with the 14-year-old, and that she was disgusted when she realized what she had done. Really? Well, you did it more than once. She also said Peterson told her, quote, "I'm supposed to protect children, not to hurt them." She also said Peterson's motivation for having sex with a student had little to do with sexual gratification and a lot to do with looking for attention and manifestations of delusional behavior. Quote, "I strongly feel there's a very low risk Miss Peterson would pose to ever reoffend." Now, Peterson's mother also took the stand. She said she was so very sorry for her daughter's actions and her daughter was remorseful. And look, there's victims on both sides of these things. I'm sure her mother was completely and utterly mortified over what her daughter did. So where is she at today? Well, she's out of jail. She was released in 2021, and I looked up her sex offender registry. She still lives in Florida, and it's really interesting on that registry that they have a victim information section. And there's a block, and it says the victim was a male and a minor. But then underneath it, it has another block, and it says victim unknown, gender male. I've just never seen that before on sex offender registries. Just struck me as strange. Maybe one of you out there knows why that is. But there you have it. Bad teacher, Stephanie Peterson. And as I tell you all the time, you want to know why these things continue to the extent that they do? And this teacher had sex numerous times and ends up with only 3 years in jail? Stephanie Peterson is a good example of that. She got off way too easy, in my opinion, and I'm telling you, a lot of it was her looks. She just didn't look like the type of person that would do that. Thank you so much for listening. Check out the Patreon for commercial-free early releases, bonus episodes, quarterly gifts, and so much more. Patreon.com/exposed podcast files. I could not produce this show without the support those members give me. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and you'd like to help support, you can do so. And I promise you're going to get every single dime of your money's worth on this show. And until next time, for Exposed, Scandalous, Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.